So welcome to the February edition of the new and emerging special education teacher cadre that we are offering here at Cadre and to our member districts. This month's conversation is going to be around co-teaching. And so as we move through a few slides just as a reference point, if you feel like you have a good example or have something to share or talk about with the rest of the group, feel free to jump in at any time and make a comment. So I'll just go ahead and click to the next slide. Does everybody got signed in that needs signed in? And if not, we'll come back to this at the end so that you can get a chance to get signed in if you're not. So the PowerPoint in the background, you'll see, was developed by one of our special education teachers. Okay. I'm gonna have to stop this for just a second. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. So this particular PowerPoint has been developed by one of our special education teacher leaders in the Quebec area. And so we're using part of this co-teaching PowerPoint because she captured some video interviews with a regular ed teacher and also with a student. So we wanted you guys to be able to have access to this PowerPoint and then the links to the videos. So when we finish this and you have the link to go back and review the PowerPoint and the Zoom meeting today, you also have access to this PowerPoint. So we just want to give credit to Stephanie at Letcher Elementary. So as we go through, you'll see that it talks about the interviews and the work. So as we get started, I'll just introduce myself again. For those of you that are new and are just joining us, my name is Dion Bates. I'm the Education Department, and I'll let everybody introduce themselves so you guys know who you are.
I'm Stephanie Kidd. I'm a math specialist with Cadre. I'm a literacy consultant.
Getting called May? No, I'm Doug Smith, behavior consultant.
Any of you guys want to take just a second, introduce yourselves and talk about co-teaching? Okay. All right. So let's just talk a little bit about what co-teaching is. So we know that co-teaching, we hear a lot about co-teaching, and we might, you know, I know when I first started with co-teaching, I kind of understood what it was, but I really didn't know how it was executed, why we needed to do it, and what was the best practice. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, is just what is co-teaching, why do we use it, and how does it improve outcomes for students, and especially students with disabilities. And so co-teaching is when you have two professionals. Both of them are experts, but they have different areas of expertise. So you have a special education teacher who is a learning process specialist, and then you have a general ed teacher who is a content specialist. So the idea is that co-teaching is we bring those two professionals together and give them the opportunity to teach collaboratively so that all students benefit from the expertise of both teachers. And for co-teaching, you know, we have lots of settings when we have students with disabilities that are in the general ed setting, and the co-teacher goes in and works collaboratively. So if we have that particular situation, we want to maximize instructional time, instructional practices, and we want to get the most effective practices for those students. But it's kind of an incidental benefit as well, because there's some students that are in that class that are not always the special ed kids, but they get some benefit as well. So although we're focused on students with disabilities, it really is a winning situation for all people involved, both teachers, because they get to see the expertise of another teacher, and it gives them somebody to work collaboratively with feedback as well. But this happens, co-teaching happens in a single classroom. So we're not talking about, when we're talking about real co-teaching, we're not talking about pulling a group of students out to another room or down the hallway or next door. We're talking about this is an event that happens in the general ed classroom with the general ed teacher and the special ed teacher. Has anybody got anything else they want to add to that? So that's just really what we're talking about with co-teaching. So then let's look at, why do we need to do it? Well, it requires that students with disabilities, we have federal and state law that says that, kids need to have access to the general ed curriculum. And we always want to have our students have access to that. We want to look at the Kentucky academic standards, and we know that kids need to be taught those standards on their grade level, and then we know what we have to do in the special ed setting in order to move students toward working toward grade level. The other thing is that we have, kids that are in the co-teaching classroom don't necessarily have an intellectual disability. You have an SLD kid, their IQ falls, in that normal range or low average range, but it's not a cognitive deficit the same way for your OHI kids. So those kids are not, those kids have an opportunity to be exposed to the general curriculum with their same age peers. And that's what we want to happen. And we know that, we have to use that time for kids to be exposed to grade level standards for all students. And so if we use this co-teaching approach, then we can make that happen. And so that's why it's really a good solution for us. Another reason that we want to use co-teaching is it is an excellent mechanism for data collection. We can see where students are at with the daily, on the targets. We can know if we're really getting to the delivery of instruction and that kids are getting instruction that supports their learning style. We can also use co-teaching methods for quick assessments. We can think about how we collect data quickly and efficiently in a classroom when we're thinking about formative assessments. So we can use like the things that are listed on the page, exit slips, quizzes, thumbs up, thumbs down, what is it can we do? And then we can quickly assess students' learning so that we have real-time data that tells us exactly where kids are at. Are they getting it or are they not getting it? And then what do we need to do immediately to change instructional practices so that we get those kids without those big gaps. So it gives them an opportunity to do that right then and there in change of instruction, that shift of instruction, pulling them in a small group, whatever it is that we need. It may be using manipulatives in a small group. It may be, preloading or pre-teaching some vocabulary, whatever it is that kids need, then this gives us an opportunity to do that. So that's why it's really important that we think about how to maximize every single second that we have when we have a co-teaching setting. And then this is exactly what I was talking about on this slide. What instructional changes? What changes do we need to make right then to the delivery of instruction to help students be successful or to have mastery toward that grade level standard? Because we have that daily target. What is it that kids are not getting? And then we know right then, do we need to teach our lesson again? Are we going to need to do a small group, another small group lesson? Are we going to have to change our approach? Are we going to have to change the instructional strategy? So we're going to have to shift that. And that was the next one. It says, do we have kids who need remediation? So if we do, then we know for the very next day how to plan our instruction. We pull a small group, we do some parallel teaching, and we're going to talk about each of the co-teaching strategies right now. So we're kind of take you guys through that. But on this slide, before we get any farther through there, this one is an interview, and I'm gonna let you guys listen to this. So this guy, Mr. Tyler Watts, is a teacher at Letcher Elementary School. And so he was interviewed because he's a general ed teacher, but he's talking about working collaboratively with a co-teacher. So I'm gonna play this little quick, it's just a 30-second video or something of him talking about what that is in that co-teaching classroom.
My name's Tyler Watts. I'm a 4th grade math teacher at Letcher Elementary. I enjoy co-teaching with my co-teacher, Miss Dina. It gives us an opportunity to really cut down the student-teacher ratio and to reach more students more quickly. We like to parallel teach, we like to team teach, and just keep mixing it up and keep the curriculum fresh and give students different perspectives and different points of views from how to understand something.
Okay, so far, let's talk just a little bit about that. So if any of you wants to talk about your co-teaching setting right now, or your experience with co-teaching, or something that you would like to share about co-teaching, or questions that you have so far. something.
It's stuff like that. And it's because the other teacher may want control of the classroom and doesn't feel comfortable, with another person in there, or other, it could be any kind of other problems there. But anyway, they have to be true to one another. It has to be like a marriage, and they have to know each other's good, bad points, and they have to help each other out. So for those that are out there that are co-teaching or going through the act of co-teaching, should I say, they're not really co-teaching. So hopefully this video and thing will show everybody the correct way and how to do things, especially the new ones that are just coming in that are on the mat. They've never been through this before. They may be a little scared. So hopefully through this, you all will learn a whole lot.
We've been studying this at the state level in our task group for co-teaching for high school and special design instruction. And there's one piece on there about how important it is that the co-teachers are compatible and that they really get along and work together, or else it's not going to work. And one district was even using like a personality match test to try to revamp their entire way of doing things and setting it up from the very beginning, with the pre-planning and giving teachers through the scheduling the ability to have lots of time to work together to get that going.
That's a good point, Nicole.
And when Brenda talks about marriage, so lots of times she refers to me as her work husband. So we have to get along that way too when we're doing our trainings. So, and I'm like a good husband. I do whatever Brenda tells me to do. But certainly co-teaching is not going to work unless both folks are willing to work together, and the content specialist be the content specialist, and the differentiation specialist be the differentiation specialist, and just kind of work off one another and play to the strengths and what's needed for that classroom so that all kids can learn.
And I also think it's important, bear in mind, because we're working with special ed teachers, that's who's listening. But you have to bear in mind that you're person don't know what coaching is. You're going to have to tell them about it, so that they'll know what to expect. Because as a special teacher myself, when a special ed teacher came into my classroom, I really wasn't sure what our roles would be, because I just had someone coming in. In my eyes, I thought it was someone who was coming to just assist and work with the kids that had been inside of my classroom. I had no idea that all these different models were out there that we could have tried. So it's important to make sure that whoever you're working with knows what type of models that we can try and what would work in that classroom. Anybody want to share something about their particular co-teaching setting or something they've tried so far, or are we pretty new at this? Okay. Well, let's talk just a little bit about the co-teaching approaches. So based on the work of Dr. Marilyn Friend, and I'm going to put this book up here, this is the one that we use most often, she talks about co-teaching and the co-teaching approaches. So those are on the screen right now. And we're going to just spend a little bit of time talking about each of those. But some of them are going to be much more effective and much more useful than other approaches. So as we work through those, we'll just talk about effectiveness, when it's appropriate, I want to effective. Okay, so the first one, we've got one teach and one observe, and that's so we've got one person that's doing the instruction while the other person is observing. We've got stations, parallel, alternative teaching, team talk, one team. So that's really the big strategy that we talk about, and that's in that work with Marilyn Friend. So you can also look that up, and at the end we're going to show you some videos. Go to on YouTube video just to see some techniques. So Doug's going to talk to us a little bit about the one teach, one observe approach. And when we
As Dion was saying, one teach, one observe is a great way of gathering data of the students in your classroom. Some examples of data collection that they could use as for every 2 minutes for 20 minutes. A teacher could take, the assistant or observer could take note and see if students are on task. So gather data that way. They could also gather data to determine if the students are abiding by the classroom expectations, such as raising your hands during small or large group instruction. And then do we need to reteach that behavior skill, or do we, is that being met equally? And then also while one teacher leads instruction on the math process, the observer could go around and watch what the students are doing on their whiteboards and could provide feedback to those students, and then provide feedback to that teacher and let them know that, yeah, the students got this, we can move on, or you may want to reteach this process or this lesson. Also, a variation on the one teach, one observe is that the observer could be gathering data on the teacher, and they can improve their practices and improve their teaching by making sure that we are hitting all the learning styles that our kids have, different learning styles in the classroom, things like that. Also, it just helps with planning, and it just helps us improve our practices as a teacher. But just a word of caution, this should be used for very brief periods of time, because if not, they will get into the like Dion likes to call it, the one teach, one drink coffee. And we don't want that to happen in our classrooms. We want both teachers to be respected and looked at as professionals and knowledgeable.
Get an infection on your daggone face.
And that's one teach, one observe.
All right, and so here's the slide that we're talking about that demonstrates what that might look like in a classroom. You want to talk about that? So you can see, the students, and you have one teacher in the front, and then the teacher is in the back. Now, just like Doug said, that is a great time to do some data collection, formative assessment. One time I was working collaboratively with a teacher, and we would use that when we were doing so I kept it on a clipboard with all the students' names and the date. And so we used that one. So like if they put up the warm up or the flashback or whatever we called it, that we put that up, and as kids were working on that, then you could check off, did they get it? Did they not get it? It was just a yes or no kind of check. Like I said, so anyway, so you can use that one, but like Doug said, not very often would you want to use that one. Okay.
The next one is station teaching. This is kind of my personal favorite that I like. You have the setup is you have your kids in stations, and then you eventually have two teacher stations. Your teacher would be at a station, and your special station would be at a different station, and then you have at a station. Some examples of what will be going on in each of these stations would be a literature or an ELA block. She could be covering the content, and breaking that down and providing the scaffolding for station and another example would be adult literacy program for your district, especially education teacher at her station for his to be working on some evidence-based teaching strategies for those struggling, I want to say readers because I'm a literacy those community strategies and also reading. So they could be working on those intervention strategies. Another example is one group is working on and the other group could be talking about those are a couple. The recommended use for this one is and then so your setup, you could look there, your setup on the screen. And we can also discuss too, depending on sometimes you have a crowded classroom and it's difficult for the kids to get up and move around, then sometimes you may want the teachers to rotate through because sometimes that's better for your classroom. And then at other times, if you have the space or if you have kids that need to get up and be able to walk around in just a little bit and get that movement in before they settle down, then the students can rotate through. So it just, either way would work, just what works best for you guys in your classroom.
Anybody want comment or questions at this point? Okay, let's talk a little bit about parallel teaching.
Okay, next we have parallel teaching. With parallel teaching, what you do is you take your class, you divide them in half. And one teacher takes one half, and the other teacher takes another half. But the teachers are teaching at the same time, the same content, the same objectives are being taught. It's just the advantage here is it reduces the student-teacher ratio to where students, there's just this, each teacher has a smaller number of students to work with. And of course, in this case, groups do not switch. They're getting the same content at the same time. And it's recommended this is something that can be done quite frequently in a classroom. And some little variations on that. Most of the time, though, groups are heterogeneously grouped. But you can do a little twist on that, and you can group them at times when you might need to. One group may need to be covering something in math where they would need to use manipulatives or calculators, and the other group may not. So you can divide those groups that day into those two different types of groups. Also, something else you might could do is you could say you want to you're working with younger kids and they're working on building numbers. And if you want to build one group could be building numbers with bundles and sticks. And another group could be building numbers with Unifix cubes. And then at the end of that class, they could partner up with each other and teach each other how to do it with the tool that they learned about. So they're going to be teaching each other how to build those numbers using their type of tool. So I thought that was a really nice way to put a little spin of variation on parallel teaching. And then if you'll click, so the setup for parallel teaching, you can see, therefore the name parallel. The groups are sitting there side by side, or in some cases you may want to have a teacher in the front and half the group facing that teacher and then a teacher in the back and the other half facing that teacher to keep them engaged and not paying attention, hopefully, to what's going on in the other group. So that's parallel teaching.
Anybody want to talk a little bit about parallel teaching or add anything to that?
I'd like to add something to that. We have to remember we don't need the same students in the same group at all times, so we need to make sure that we change and rotate students out so we don't have all the special ed kids into one group all the time. That's just showing that all the special ed kids are in one group, so we don't want to do that.
Good.
You guys know that I'm glad Brenda said that, because when John O'Connor talks about flexible grouping, that's exactly what he's talking about. When you're talking about specially designed instruction, and you're talking about flexible grouping, it's arranging those groups so you get the maximum for each one of them in the learning process. And certainly the research supports those groups being, if you can have them around 8 in a group. I know sometimes that doesn't work always if you have 2 and you've got 30 in a class, but you can certainly group them in groups of 8 and have them rotating if you're using station teaching. Along with parallel teaching, there are some things about grouping and how you group them that research supports those groups being flexible and not so rigid and not always having homogeneous groups.
Okay, I think now we're ready. We'll go ahead and move into alternative teaching.
So alternative teaching is one of those things we're using. It's not going to be one of those things that's going to be done often, but it's done for small group instruction, and you want to make sure you're paying special attention to something that either needs to have remediation or maybe some reteaching that needs to be done. This could also be used for pre-teaching, so keep that in mind also. The other thing is you're going to provide additional practice during this time. It's going to be a reteaching moment of a taught skill that you've already done or a concept that you've worked on. This could be an extension to that concept that you've been working on that those kids may need. It could also be just an enrichment activity they may need. But pre-teaching is another way of getting this alternate teaching going, because a student may need to have the vocabulary before the next class, those kind of things, just to make sure that they understand what's going to be going on prior to. So keep that in mind. And then it can also be a time to be a catch-up time. Those kids who don't always have illnesses or related things, those kinds of things, or a student who misses out because of being taken out of class for speech or OT, this could be catch-up time for them. So that's what this is for. And then if you look at the next slide, you can see there's the small group in the back, and that's where that alternative teaching would go on.
Anybody want to comment on that one? Are you finished with that one, Stephen?
We just need to remember that regular ed as well as special ed students can be in that group. Not only special ed, but those that fall through the cracks, and some of them, the parents that don't want their kid to be labeled as special ed, those are the kids that can go back there, with them. Just like Stephanie said, if they need remediation, they can go back with that teacher. And it doesn't have to be a special ed teacher. They can rotate that out. It could be the general ed one day, and the next, or one time, and then the next time it could be the special ed.
Yeah, Brenda, you're right. This could be a great thing for tier 3 and tier 2 students.
Yes.
Good. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay, we'll talk just a little bit about the next approach, and that's called the team teaching. And so that's when you have both teachers, and you look at that particular slide, and it says that both teachers are contributing equally to that instruction. And again, that's not, one teach, one assist, or it's not one teach, one observe. This is really that both teachers are active in the delivery of instruction. Now, we might not use that all the time, because you look at, that's not one we want to use all the time. But it is a good opportunity for, one teacher maybe to teach a strategy, and then another teacher may have a different way to solve a problem. And that would allow students to see two perspectives. Brenda, do you have anything you want to say about that on team teaching?
No, you said about all on that one, but team teaching is a great way. But like Dion said, it's not every day. And they feed off each other. And we've had many co-teaching teams that have done this wonderfully in the different counties that we had previous. But, this is when they know each other, and they just about know what they're going to say to each other, out loud. So, and that way they respond back and forth to each other, and they just sort of pick up off each other. And it's great. It's a great approach, but you wouldn't do it all the time.
Right. And here's an example of what that might look like in a classroom. So you see that you have both teachers. We were able to see this really well in a 9th grade algebra class. And so half the teachers were working together, and then they were, one teacher was part of they worked together and taught the lesson, and then and students were kind of divided, and they were able to work on some specific skills. So it went from team teaching and then to some parallel teaching and then back into some team teaching. So it was that they could do real time right there immediately. As they were able to see that one kid, you know, a couple of the kids needed some extra support, so then that's when they shifted to parallel. The team teaching is great, like Brenda said, when you can work collaboratively and, you know, working together pretty well. Those models can blend in and and then back into so whatever. So yeah, when you team teaching, and it wouldn't be one you would use all the time because it's just not, you know, it's not follow instructions. So the next one is one teach, one assist. You see on this slide, you know, we use that most often when we're first learning about coaches. But the research tells us that is the most, or it's actually the most used but least effective approach. And so sometimes we start out that way because we don't really know what the roles are and we don't have a real expectation for what each person's role is as far as the general educational expectations. I was talking about this earlier. And sometimes we use that as we learn, but it's the least effective. So we hardly ever want to use one teach, one assist. That would be one that you would rarely ever even try to figure, you know, even integrate in there. That's probably one that I was trying to think, maybe that one would, the only time you would do that is if you had a student that had a really trying to help students, you know, with a particular thing, but that you would go into that one assist and then you fall back into another approach. You wouldn't stay in a whole class instruction.
So if you had this content that your special ed teacher wasn't really confident in, then when it was introduced, the new material was introduced, I could see that as the scenario.
Yes.
But once that you want to move away from that,
Yeah, you'd be right back out of that. Like I said, you never use that for a whole class. You might use that for just like I said, one particular component of that class or one period of time, and then you go back into another.
With doing lab experiments and things like that in a science classroom because they just had to assist or help the kids that I worked with a little bit more. And then after that assignment or lab experiment or whatever it was completed, then I went back into one teach, one observe, or went back into the station teaching.
I like also when the teacher, one of the teachers is up talking and then they ask the class questions or whatever, and the other teacher is scribing the answers or the response of the students. So I think that helps too, because we've got some visual learners and sometimes they have to see that before they can actually process it. So, you know, and again, we wouldn't do that all the time.
Right. And that's a real good example, Brenda, because when I worked collaboratively with a teacher, a lot of times we do the instruction and then I spend a lot of time doing the charting. So I'd use a lot of organizers or I'd have them on chart. So
Yeah,
I know what the teacher was saying in occasions like that. And then that visual support was left up in the classroom for students later on. So that is another way we can provide some support for each other with one assist, and then we go back into team teaching, or then we move back into parallel. So here I'm going to show you guys. This one's really good, and this again, I told you this was Stephanie Nichols' school video course. But they interviewed a student at that same school where the coaching was happening, and this student I'm going to play this for you, and he's just talking about what co-teaching is like at his school for him, his experience. So.
My name is Jacob Nichols, and I am in the 4th grade at Letcher Elementary. I like having 2 teachers in my room because one is teaching and one can help me. I also like it because if I don't understand something that one teacher teaches, I have another teacher who can explain it in a whole different way. It helps me learn by 2 teachers in the classroom.
So I need to talk about what that looked like in his classroom. So I think that will help. Uh, The other thing is, we just want to make sure that we have an opportunity for shared plans. So it's really important that we use plans because, we're not going to know what their expectation is, what their roles and responsibilities are if we don't have that way to share that information. The other thing is, we can do that electronically. We've had teachers that are effective co-teachers that use, they text each other, they share, Google Classroom. They have, they have emailing back and forth with lesson plans. You want to do this part? What do you want to do with this? How do you think the delivery of this instruction might be? And then you say, what instructional strategy do you think would work? And then they try that and to do that. The other thing is, they go right, before the class starts, just double check and making sure that they have a good understanding what their role is. And so I think that's really important. So be thinking about what kind of co-teaching approach that you might select at your school. But we would recommend only trying one or two of those. You wouldn't want to go in there and try all of those different kinds of approaches. You may want to select one or two, and the most effective ones, we know are parallel teaching, station teaching, and then we have alternative teaching and team teaching. So you might want to, if you would select from the most effective ones, will really get you going to begin with. And then this slide here is just the references and resources. There are so many things. You can look at Marilyn Friend's work. You can look at, we have another thing from NPR, and that one we'll put up here for you too, but it's about co-teaching. So it just talks about what those co-teaching practices are that we've talked about today. It gives you a little more in-depth understanding of those, and it just gives us more information about that professional partnership and that collegiality that we have when we work together collectively.